How do you actually survive 10 years in the Philippines? I emigrated at the beginning of 2014 and have actually managed to make it 10 years already. Here, I know some people have managed to stay even longer, but they probably look like this too. I just want to tell you a bit about how things have gone for me over these 10 years. Why are there no videos from my early days? That was actually a big mistake I made, and one that I would advise anyone who, if you're emigrating anew and are a bit younger, I can only advise you just start a YouTube channel. Because in the beginning, I hardly made any videos or took any photos. I had a history as a party photographer in Germany and was out every weekend. I took hundreds of thousands of pictures and just wanted some peace and quiet here. Now that's coming back to bite me because all that information is missing. I have a few videos and this is pictures from trips we took back then, but I really can't turn those into videos because some of them are only 720 pixels in resolution. If you want to see the first years, I made a video out of the photo book I gave my mother for Christmas. There you can basically see that I spent the first year here living in a condo in one oasis, because condos are just a bit more of a Western lifestyle and comfortable when you first come to a new country, if you don't want to immediately take the plunge and move straight to the provinces. There you can see how I lived with my girlfriend at the time and how I bought my cars and so on. And now I just want to briefly get started. And if the humming and buzzing bothers you a bit, that's my new best friend. I just bought it because in the Philippines it's hot and sometimes you just need some air. My old best friend, you can still see it in some of the older videos, kind of orange colored, a small handheld fan. Unfortunately, after almost 9 years, it finally gave up the ghost and was, so to speak, sent off to the land of old fans, retired, so to speak. And my new fan is a bit different because it simply doesn't have a casing, it's foldable, and so it fits much better in a bag than such a bulky device. But it has 4,500 milliamp hours. Battery can be used as a power bank, takes about 3 to 4 hours to charge and works pretty well. Wind. I don't have long hair, so a fan like this is just right for me. It costs about 400 pesos on Lazada, 450 I think with shipping. It's worth it. No, I'm curious to see if it lasts half a year. Back to my first 10 years. The first month, I still had a pretty good time. A short-term girlfriend, I had met her online, as you do, because from my previous vacations, I knew it's just better to have someone by your side when you have things to do or places to go. A Filipina can talk to the locals and solve problems much more effectively, but we lived together for a month and then just realized it wasn't working out. And that's precisely why I ultimately broke up with her and definitively said goodbye forever. So my most important advice for anyone just beginning a new relationship is this. A girlfriend absolutely shouldn't move in right away, not at all. Or if she does move in, she shouldn't bring too many things with her, because the longer she lives with you and the more things she has, since she's living at your place, the harder it is to tell the girl that it's not working and she has to leave. As Europeans, we always wonder, how is she going to get her things now? Where is she supposed to live? The fact is, for an average Filipino, that's not a problem at all. They have friends, they have family they can simply go back to. I noticed that with my ex-girlfriend as well. I was with her for 7 years. When I told her from one day to the next that she had to leave, she just asked me if she could set up a time to pick up her things because she had a bit more stuff. But basically, I also know there are situations, for example, where a maid who is employed, the landlord who employs the maid simply put her things outside the door when the girl was visiting her parents in the province, because then the guard from the small subdivision rang our doorbell and asked if he could put the things under our porch because it might rain. And then we looked over at the neighbor and he had actually just put the backpack there. And I think 3 plastic bags, basically the belongings, the possessions of his maid, he had just put them in front of the door and simply sent the girl a text message and said, "You can pick up your things here. We don't need you anymore." And then the maid texted the guard and asked what's going on. And the guard looked, saw the stuff, and he was simply caring and made sure that at least the things didn't get wet so that the maid could pick up her things after a week. That's how things are done in the Philippines too. But we Europeans don't do things like that, and that's why you should just make sure that a girl doesn't have too much so that she can move out with just 1 or 2 bags. Why did I move out of one oasis, out of a condo? Quite simply because it's way too expensive. It is luxurious, yes, but only in the beginning, and that's only when the complex isn't fully occupied yet. Because when I moved in, the complex was maybe a third full and the pool was beautifully empty. When I moved out, they had just started filling 2 buildings with tenants and owners, so to speak. And the complex was, I would say, about 60% occupied. But they had also started building 2 or 3 more buildings in the meantime, just not another pool. And when I moved out, going to the pool on the weekend was already out of the question because it was packed. And that's why you can say that these condos always look beautiful when you visit them during the day because people are at work. But in their free time and on weekends when people aren't working, they want to use the pool, they want to use the rooftop terrace, and then it's not so great. Living in a townhouse like I've been doing here for 9 years now is simply much cheaper because in a townhouse, you can basically say you get double the living space for half the price. My roughly 50 square meter condo costs 25,000 pesos. My current place is just under 65 square meters. The townhouse costs 14,000 pesos. So you can see the price difference. Of course, I don't have a pool here, but I don't need one because I can just go swim in the sea. Although that's not really the thing here in Cebu City. The first major purchase I made, of course, was after 6 months when I was able to convert my driver's license to buy a car as well. Because taking taxis is fun, it's comfortable. And if you live downtown and only have short trips to the malls, it's fine. But the longer you rely only on taxis, the more stressful it gets. And that's why I thought, now I'll buy myself a car. Back then, my ex had relatives who wanted to sell a Honda CRV. They wanted to, and it was well maintained, looked great, drove perfectly. And at the time, I think it was 6 or 7 years old, or maybe 7 or 8. I can't really remember exactly. So I said, okay, 300,000 pesos is what it's worth to me just to have a car for now. And I bought it. It drove perfectly and just had a few minor issues. I had to change the tires, which is normal wear and tear. But one day something else happened. Apparently, somewhere in the front left of the engine compartment, there were really loud bang, bang, bang noises. Something was wrong with the shock absorber. So I thought, okay, I'll go to one of the better workshops here. That was Roadster, where we had already been a few times. So I brought the car there and told the mechanic. They knew me too, since I had all the little things like oil changes done there. I told him when I drive, something bangs somewhere in the front left, check the shock absorber. And then they said, yeah, we need to take a look. We need to do a test drive, come back on Monday. That was basically Thursday or so when I brought it in. Okay, I went back on Thursday and asked, so what's the situation? Well, in the front left, even after a test drive, they didn't hear anything. So nothing loud could be heard. I don't know, maybe they must be Filipinos. In any case, they checked the shock absorbers in the back, adjusted them and set the wheel bearing and everything, checked everything. And of course, you're supposed to pay for that. And as soon as I drove out of the lot, those loud banging noises were right back at the front. Great. So basically, they didn't do anything because to miss that, I don't know, you'd have to be deaf, but whatever. But I didn't really want to go back and tell them, hey, listen to this banging noise. Plus, there were over 100 kilometers added on the odometer. Now, you have to consider from Cebu City, it's 90 kilometers up to Bogo. That means they took a very extensive test drive, probably visiting relatives in the province over the weekend. And that's also why whenever you take your car in for repairs at the workshop, you should always have the odometer reading written on the receipt when you drop it off, and then compare how much they drove it while you were away. Otherwise, they really do take advantage of it here sometimes. So I went to another dealer, 3J Banilat, and told them about it. And the next day, the car was repaired because it was the mounting at the top of the shock absorber that was worn out. Apparently, the rubber was damaged, rotten, and they simply replaced it. It cost 5 or 6 euros, and then the car was fine again. You really have to be careful with workshops here because the mechanics are usually specialized in just one part of the car. Let's say bodywork, tires, maybe the air conditioning. But when it comes to anything else, they have absolutely no clue. And if you're unlucky and the mechanic takes the car and says, yeah, we can do it, it gets complicated. So that's why you really should ask Filipinos. Ask where you can get things like that properly repaired if you have any damage. Because these workshops, especially the independent ones, are really more specialized in multicabs. Or the Toyota Vios, which are used everywhere as taxis, they know those inside out. But anything that's a bit more specialized becomes a problem. That's also why I bought the multicab now, because I don't have any problems with it. It runs, and if it ever doesn't, even the original Jungle Doctor could probably fix it with rubber from a rubber tree, most likely. After the first year in the condo, as I said, I moved into a townhouse. Luckily, through my ex-girlfriend at the time, we found a vacant townhouse right here. That was number 6. Today, I live in number 9. And because of that, I also knew, or rather, the landlords were really great. But it was a small row house. And of course, even though it was more spacious than the condo, you do notice that the houses here are built quite narrow. And after a year, I said, it's not really my thing because I need a bit more space. And that's why we moved again. And moving here is done with Lipat Bahai. Moving companies like the ones in Germany don't exist here. Maybe you'll find them in Manila, where the rich and beautiful live, who can afford such moving companies through their companies. Those are real specialists. But the average Filipino uses Lipat Bahay because they don't have much. And the first few times, we also moved with an open multi-cab, so to speak, packed everything into boxes, tied them up, loaded them onto the truck bed, and off we went. And that works as long as you don't have too many things yet and are willing to accept a few minor damages. So if you're too German and think that nothing at all should get damaged, you won't really be happy here. Because Filipinos aren't really moving companies. They just load things up somehow and take them away. The second move was exactly the same. They showed up with their multi-cab and it was already cloudy. And then they just put everything onto the truck bed. And then I just asked, do you have anything to cover this with? Because if we're driving from here out to Lahak, it'll take us a good half hour to an hour. And it's guaranteed to rain. Sorry, sir, we don't have anything. Thank God I had bought a rain cover, a sun top for my Honda CRV, and we were able to pull that over everything. Of course, by the second trip, it was beautifully torn. Well, that's just how it is. Philippines. But at least my clothes stayed dry. Otherwise, they would have gotten completely soaked. And if you think moving here is like moving in Germany, where you empty everything out of the closets into boxes, wrap everything nicely in paper so nothing gets damaged, nobody really does that here. Clothes in particular are kept in these plastic drawer units and they just stay there inside because nothing can get mixed up in there, and it saves you a ton of work packing up all those little things for all the small stuff you always have around the house. Take another look at the shelf back there, or look over there again. All those little odds and ends, you just pack them up. You just put them in cardboard boxes, load them onto the truck bed, and drive them over. And cardboard boxes are a problem because you can't get them here either. You can try to get banana boxes at the markets, but the vendors want to keep them for themselves because they also need boxes to deliver their goods. That's why I can only advise anyone moving here with balikbayan boxes to keep them. I've still got my 4 balikbayan boxes after 10 years. Back then, before leaving Germany, I wrapped them all around with that tape so they'd be waterproof and splash proof. And after 10 years, they're still in perfect condition because they're made of double-walled corrugated cardboard. And I can only tell everyone, make sure to keep them because as soon as you move again, you'll be glad for every box you have. On, I think, the third move, we had a bigger supplier or a bigger truck. That was the move. When we moved back here from LA Huck, and then I asked as well because we had more stuff. Here's Lucy. Don't you know someone who has a closed truck so we can move more stuff in one trip? And thank God, the neighbor who lived in number 3 at the time, he had a delivery service like that. Yeah, you know those trucks that say not for hire on them. Who cares about that here? He then let us use his truck along with 2 helpers. And with 2 trips, we brought our entire household over here. But just think, please don't ever think that Filipinos inherently know how to expertly pack a moving truck. They simply just take whatever items are readily available on the ground floor and then haphazardly load them into the waiting moving truck, often without much thought or organization. And then the next thing goes on top, and the next thing somehow goes on top too until the truck is full. After I watched them for a bit, I just said to the 2 of them, stop, 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 stop. And then I looked at them and asked, do you know Tetris, the computer game? Yes, sir. And then I said, look at this like it's Tetris. Just fit the parts into each other. So play Tetris properly and don't put the small things in the back and the desk from the first floor. You won't be able to fit it in anymore because if you put it on top, everything will collapse. Instead, heavy things, big things go in first. And then I have to teach them that fast. Filipinos just have no idea about this. So you really have to be there yourself and keep an eye on things. But that just gets harder as you get older. Back then, in my mid-50s, it was still doable. Now, at 60, I think I don't even want to deal with the next moves anymore because it just upsets me too much. But as I said, moving is much cheaper here. There is no moving insurance. So if something breaks, it's broken. That's why you should transport important or expensive things yourself in your own car and only let them handle the smaller items. A move with a truck like that, I think it didn't even cost me 5,000 pesos for 2 trips with 2 helpers. So if I paid 5,000 or 6,000 pesos in total, that was it. And as I said, that was the household for, well, We have 3 small rooms here, plus a living room and everything. So fridge, kitchenette, TV. Back then it was still a 50-inch TV. So you could say a mid-range apartment in Germany, you'd move for 100, maybe now 150 euros. Of course, I also had some life-changing experiences in those 10 years. I bought my first car. And when we moved from the suburbs here in Inner Javan to the city center, I suddenly realized it guzzled gas like crazy. It easily used, especially the special CAV, 25 liters of gasoline per 100 kilometers, because driving in the city center is stop and go and stop and go. And you really end up waiting up to 4 or 5 minutes at a red light. And then you think, in Germany, I would just turn off the engine and save gas. You think that here maybe once for about 30 to 60 seconds. Then the car gets so hot, especially when the sun is shining, that you have to turn the air conditioning back on. And to keep the air conditioning running, the engine has to be on, otherwise the battery runs out quickly. So I quickly decided the old car uses too much gas, so I'll buy a new one. And that was the next problem because I was a tourist. That means I do have a bank account here that I can use to withdraw money, but I can't get a loan because I don't have any income. But my German bank, the DKB, also wouldn't give me a loan because I'm no longer registered in Germany or working there. The fact that I had 100,000 euros in my stock portfolio at DKB basically didn't interest them at all. But in hindsight, it wasn't a problem at all, because if I had taken out a loan just from the interest alone, I would have easily paid 2,000 or 3,000 euros more for the car. So I simply transferred the necessary 24,000 euros for a Mitsubishi Montero from my German account, so to speak, over here in cash and bought the car. That was done in 3 installments. I transferred 8,000 euros 3 times, because otherwise I would have had to explain to the tax office or the tax authorities again, blah, 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 where the money came from, what I intended to do with it, blah, blah, blah. And the exemption limit was somewhere around 10,000. So I said, okay, 3 times 8,000, I don't have to declare anything at all. And that's exactly how it turned out. Then the 24,000 euros were in the account. And now the question is, how do you pay 24,000 euros, or in local currency, that was, I think it was 1.5 million pesos. How do you get that to the dealer? Because there are only 1,000 peso bills. Back in the day, people would actually make purchases like that with 1,500, 1,000 peso bills in their pockets or backpacks, simply because they didn't know any better. That still happens today. But of course, I know a bit more, so I just told the branch manager that I needed what's called a manager's check made out to Auto World CBU. And for over 1.5 million, that cost me 50 pesos. And this manager's check, it's just a piece of paper. It fits right into your wallet. And with that, I go to Auto World and put 1.5 million pesos on the counter for them. I don't have to carry anything around with me. Here, people actually get shot for much, much less money. There was a case where a girl went to pick up the salaries for the company. She went to the bank at the SMC site and withdrew 200,000 pesos. Then she took a habal to go to the company to deliver the salaries, but she was shot and her backpack was stolen. How can something like that happen? When you're carrying large amounts of money, someone always notices. And if the wrong person notices, all it takes is a quick phone call. Hey, he just withdrew 1.5 million pesos and he looks like this and that and is traveling like this and that. Then just like that, you lose your money and in some cases your life. That's why with larger sums, for anything over 100,000 or 200,000 pesos, I would really only use checks. Checks are still very common here. And I could also get a checkbook for my account. It's actually quite widespread, and it's a very safe way to pay out or pay large amounts without having to carry bundles of cash around with you. I bought the Mitsubishi brand new from the dealer, as I said, and I also told myself that would save me a lot of trouble. A lot of things with maintenance, because I just take it in for the scheduled services, and then the car is in good shape. And after 3 or 4 years, once it's broken in, I can have regular things like oil changes, new tires, and so on done by a friend of mine, Charlie. He's now my go-to mechanic here, whom I got to know through Roy, my neighbor. And Charlie, he takes care of those little things as far as he can, because as a backyard mechanic, so to speak, he can't actually read or work on the electronics of a brand new car. These days, there are backyard mechanics who can just load all that stuff for common cars onto their laptops, and they can do things like that too now. But with new cars, you can get the small stuff done much, much cheaper by a backyard mechanic. And for the really expensive things, you have to go to the workshop. That's why so few people actually drive older cars here, older cars, because they also say that repair costs outside the warranty period just get too high. And then the car gets sold. The next significant event happened in my second year here. That was when Christine, my ex's sister-in-law, had a stroke at the age of 21. I've made videos about that too. And that was really tough because back then I was still way too German, way too European, and way too focused on we need help right away, we have to help. And that ended up costing me 4,000 euros because who pays for all of that when you're so willing to help? Exactly, you do. And those are the kind of pivotal learning experiences I can say that you learn from here. Filipinos help themselves. And as long as you're not dead in the Philippines, you'll survive. And if afterwards you're a bit physically limited, well, that's just life here. And that's the only way you can survive here in the long run. If you think you have to help everyone right away and freely give away your own money, and so on and so forth, you'll go broke very quickly. So it's really like this here. Filipinos know they don't have money and they live accordingly. That means they look at what they can do with what they have available. And that's what gets done. For everything else, people sometimes go into truly horrendous debt. And yes, where that leads, I know, but I don't even want to think about it. So in those cases, children probably really do get sold into slavery. But that's just how it is here, especially when it comes to family. And honestly, I can only advise everyone to make sure you're protected against this. I'll make a separate video about how best to secure your girlfriend in this regard. Because I also realized or learned from my own experience, don't take her to the expensive private hospital. Make sure that when it comes to medication treatments, the affordable options are chosen. And as soon as the girl is able, get her out of the hospital and continue her treatment at home. That's what I did with my ex-girlfriend when she had kidney tuberculosis. Yes, tuberculosis isn't just in the lungs. Tuberculosis is one of the few truly terrible strains of bacteria that can be found in all organs. And when my girlfriend had kidney tuberculosis, I also said as soon as the girl can go home, give her the pills instead of keeping her hooked up to the IV and paying for the expensive hotel, or rather paying for the expensive hospital. I also made a video about that, which I definitely recommend you watch. Of course, in the 10 years I've been here, I've also made a lot of acquaintances and friends. And I've also been able to take a lot from my life as a project manager. The bureaucracy here doesn't really bother me at all because I know I can't fight against it. A perfect example was the day before yesterday when I had to renew my business registration again. I went to the barangay because I needed to get the clearance from the barangay again. And suddenly they noticed that last year's document isn't made out to Götz Kohlberg blogger at all, but to a Divine Water refilling station. So I also wonder, did Elsie and I overlook that last year, that it's not my company? But even the people from the government office who also need these documents, they must have been asleep too. I don't know. But then I said it must have been a mistake. I didn't notice it either. So at the barangay, after just 10 minutes, I simply got my new certificate for this year, and that was it. Instead of making a big fuss about it, just shrug your shoulders and say, I just need the new one. Boom, you get it. And then we went to the government office because I also have to re-register my business there at the mayor's office. And there you first have to pay taxes, the community taxes. So we went there, it cost 175 pesos, and he nicely wrote my name in cursive, yes, Kohlberg. But by then it was already late, so we went to have lunch first. And then I come back to the counter, and the girl just looks at it, and she says, looks at my ID, looks back at it and says, yeah, but the last name is spelled with a G, he wrote it with an S. Well, he had written a cursive G, which you could also read as an S. So before I even start talking to the girl there about the interpretation of cursive letters and what is a G and what is an S and blah, forget it. So come on, give me the documents back. Told him, here, the girl reads this as an S and not as a G. Can you just... He then made it into a G again, put it back, and bam, the matter was settled. Because she also said, have a good day, and sorry. For that, I told her, you're just doing your job. And I had just noticed with the other barangay certificate, if you don't pay attention to such small details, it can lead to much bigger problems later on in these bureaucratic processes. And that's why you just have to say, if somewhere a problem comes up, it's not a big deal. Don't ask why, how come, or for what reason. Just ask, what do I need to do to solve the problem? That's what you do. The problem is solved. If you start arguing about it, saying, oh, this is going to take time and now I have to go left and right and whatever, that just costs you nerves and is absolutely not helpful here. Other things that also occupied my mind. In the last 10 years, there was COVID. A lot of people got upset about it, vaccinate or not vaccinate. I tell myself today, actually, I wouldn't have gotten vaccinated, but I live in the Philippines and I'm here privately. I have private health insurance. That means if something happens to me and I end up in the hospital, it gets expensive. So I simply thought to myself, if this Pfizer vaccine reduces my risk of ending up in intensive care, and the statistics showed that, so it was worth it to me, because whether I end up paying 1 million pesos for maybe 1 or 2 weeks on a ventilator and then my health insurance premiums go up or not, that's a big difference. And that's why I told myself, I'm already at the end of my 50s. I'm going to die of something anyway. So come on, give me the shot. It was free anyway, and I was able to make videos about it. So you have to be pragmatic here. And if you get worked up over little things and think, no, not me, you'll run into problems, especially as a foreigner in another country, because we had to show proof of vaccination everywhere. And if I keep showing up as a foreigner saying, I'm not getting vaccinated, blah, blah, then I'll get kicked out of here pretty quickly. So you adapt and say, okay, of course, you could have left the country, sure, as a tourist who had already been here for, I think, 6 or 7 years with all your belongings here and nothing left in Germany. So am I really going to go back to Germany where I have nothing to live on and no job? And here is my household. My girlfriend lives here that has to somehow